It's almost Halloween, not a Jewish holiday, but gives us the opportunity to talk about something fun, a monster in ancient Jewish folklore. So, the monster that I want to talk about today is the Golem of Prague. The Golem of Prague was created by a wise rabbi, or at least a learned rabbi named Maharal of Prague. Story comes from about 500 years ago, and in Prague at the time, the Jewish community was under enormous threat of pogroms and persecution, and the Maharal decided to create this mystical, magical creature, became a monster eventually, this creature called the Golem, whose job it was to protect the Jewish community. So the Maharal takes some clay from the banks of the river, forms it into the Golem, this large, massive, powerful creature. And then to bring the Golem to life, the Maharal writes a special word in Hebrew on its forehead, emet, which means truth. And in that way, the Golem is brought to life. And at first, the Golem does everything that the Maharal intended for him to do. He protected the Jewish community, served the Jewish community, was nothing but helpful in every sense of the way, until things started to go wrong and the Maharal started to lose control of the Golem. It became a destructive force rather than a helpful one. And so the Maharal had to destroy the creature, which he did by erasing the first Hebrew letter on its forehead. So it no longer said emet, truth, it said met, which means death. And the Maharal destroyed the Golem in that way. It reminds me a little bit of the story of Frankenstein, where Frankenstein tries to create a monster, and he does, and then eventually falls out of love with his own creation because it turns out that he created the monster. Sounds to me a little bit like the Maharal did the same thing just a few hundred years earlier than Frankenstein. But what can we learn from it? In what way is it possibly still relevant today? Or is it just a folk story that's a little entertaining, but not much beyond that? So we're going to get to that question. But first, I want to go through some of the classic Jewish source material that leads up to the story of the Golem, so we can kind of get a little bit of background. And then after we get some background, we can kind of dive into what the story might mean for us today. So first, let me share my screen. So this is all on Safari, and I'll put a link in the description down below. So if you want, you can click on the link and you can see this source sheet for yourself. But I'm sharing my screen right now, so you can see it that way as well. So the first source comes from Psalm 139, verse 16. It says, Golmi ra'u einecha, your eyes saw my unformed limbs. Unformed limbs, my unformed limbs. In Hebrew, that's Golmi right here. That seems to be the linguistic origin of the word golem, or at least one of the first times that we come across that word, golem, golmi, my unformed limbs. And that seems to be what the Maharal does, is takes this thing that's unformed and then makes it into this creature, this powerful creature that protected the community. Okay, moving right along. There is this idea that says that God created the world with words. It's in the Torah itself. God says, let there be light, and there was light, so why can't people create as well? After all, we have access to words. And that is what the Maharal does, is use that access to words to create. Over here, there's a passage from ancient mystical work called Sefer Yetzirah. That means the book of formation, book of creation, but formation. It says, God, Adonai of hosts, God of Israel, on and on and on, created the world in 32 wondrous ways of wisdom, using 3 linguistic tools, with counting, with writing, and with speech. And all of those, it's right here, all of those share the same root in Hebrew. Counting, speech, writing. These are all powerful tools available for creation, something that people can use too. By the way, little side note, it's not just the Maharal who is a bit of a magician. Houdini was also Jewish, and when Houdini had to come up with a phrase when he was casting his spell and putting on his show, he turned to his Jewish origin and came up with the phrase abracadabra. I will create as I speak. So abra means I will create. The first line of the Hebrew Bible, the Torah, says, Bereshit bara Elohim. Bara means create. God created. In the beginning, God created. Abra, same thing, but I will create. Kedavra, as I speak. So Houdini went back to his old Hebrew school days and picked out a phrase that became very popular. So Emet on the Golem's forehead was a little bit of a precursor to Houdini saying abracadabra. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and we'll just talk for a moment. So what's the lesson that we can take from this? I think one of them is that it's not new that people become scared of their own creations. This is the story of the Maharal, the Golem of Prague. This is the story of Frankenstein, as people make things even with the best of intentions, and even if they initially work in a certain way, ways intended, eventually there's the danger that we lose control of things. And that's still a very real concern. We look at social media and how excited people still use it, all the time, but especially when it was first created, it was seen as a way to connect with lots of upside and very little downside. But as time has gone on, we've seen, yes, maybe the upside is still there, a way to stay connected, but the downsides are becoming more and more apparent when we talk about mental health and the fragmentation of society and the proliferation of various kinds of hatreds and harmful beliefs, on and on and on. We also see things like AI, which we're just beginning to get used to in our world, and it's going to have a more prominent place as time goes on. But right now, it seems like it's a very useful tool. But what's the future going to bring with AI? Certain modes or methods of political discourse, they might seem helpful when we use them in the short term to achieve certain desired effects in the short term, but long term, maybe it can be quite destructive as well. So the story of the Golem, the story of the Maharal of Prague, maybe is to be careful with what we create. We have tremendous power to make things. It's not just God that creates. People have this creative power as well. And when we use that power, it could have all sorts of benefits, but also all sorts of consequences as well. And the story of the Golem invites us to think about that. So, in honor of Halloween, happy Halloween, everyone. A little reflection on a Jewish story of a monster from a few hundred years ago. If you like this, give it a thumbs up, please, and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. It helps us to grow the channel so we can reach more people. Thank you very much, everyone, and see you next time.